A man crouches at the edge of a fire 20,000 years ago, squinting into the dark. Something moved beyond the light. A hyena, a stranger, something hungry. Everyone else already saw it. He didn't. Tomorrow will be worse. The herd will break across open ground and vanish into glare. A thorn will snap off in someone's foot, buried too deep for him to find. Smoke will sting his eyes, the way it does every night now. Age is doing the rest. Ancient humans had almost no way to treat failing eyesight, and that single fact hides a much bigger question than it looks like. Losing your distance vision is not the same problem as losing your close focus. Glare, haze, night blindness, injury, dimness, these are different failures with different consequences, and they don't kill you the same way. So what actually happened when someone could no longer see well enough to do what survival demanded? The obvious answer is that they died. But that answer collapses the moment you think about what humans are actually like. Our species has always carried people with weak eyes, aging eyes, injured eyes, and we still spread across deserts, forests, ice sheets, and coastlines. If failing vision were an automatic death sentence, humanity's range should have stayed a lot smaller than it did. The first mistake is picturing eyesight through a modern lens. Poor vision today means struggling to read a menu, drive at night, or make out a road sign. That's an extremely specific, extremely recent kind of visual failure. Nobody in the Pleistocene was parsing an eye chart or scrolling a phone at arm's length. So the real question isn't how did they cope with bad eyesight, it's what kind of seeing actually mattered to them in the first place. Take nearsightedness. In some cities today, most teenagers are myopic, which makes short-range blur feel like a baseline human condition. But it probably wasn't one in deep prehistory. Myopia isn't purely genetic. Childhood environment shapes it heavily, and one of the most consistent findings in vision research is that kids who spend more time outdoors are less likely to develop it. Reading and other close-up work push the other way. An Ice Age child spent nearly their entire waking life outdoors, tracking long sight lines across open country with nothing that resembled a book or a screen anywhere nearby. That doesn't mean nobody was born nearsighted. Human variation doesn't disappear because the environment changes, but the specific epidemic version of myopia we live with now was very likely rarer then. If nearsightedness wasn't the main threat, age was. Somewhere in midlife, the lens inside the eye stiffens, presbyopia, and close focus starts to go. Splinters get harder to find, fibers get harder to twist, fish bones, thorns, parasites, fine tool work, all the close, fiddly labor of daily life starts sliding out of focus. This happens to nearly everyone who lives long enough. Today you buy reading glasses at a pharmacy counter and forget about it within a week. A forager 40,000 years ago had no such fix. So did aging eyes just mean the group quietly wrote you off? Not if you look at what kind of animal humans actually are. We're unusually good at keeping older people economically and socially useful well past their physical peak. In foraging societies, people past their prime still process food, mind children, maintain tools, remember migration routes, know which plants heal and which ones kill, and catch trouble early. A man who can no longer spot antelope on open ground might still know exactly where the herd goes once the dry season tightens. A woman whose close vision is fading might still be the one person in camp who knows which route is safe, which bark settles a bad stomach, which child's cough means something worse than a cold. That's the core mistake in how we picture ancient survival. As a solo test, one body against the landscape, won or lost on individual physical perfection. Real life wasn't like that. It was cooperative, divided, layered. Small-scale societies have never run on identical, interchangeable people. Some are better trackers, some better nappers, some the ones who calm a fight before it turns physical. Losing sharp vision didn't erase a person from that division of labor. It just shifted which slot they filled. If your eyesight failed, your role shifted rather than ended. Less hunting, more processing, less tracking, more advising, less running the chase, more remembering exactly where it always ends up. In a world without writing, that memory wasn't a soft consolation prize. It was infrastructure the whole group ran on. Some of what people actually did about failing eyesight was almost embarrassingly low-tech. They got closer. Someone losing distance vision leans on what's near. Someone losing close focus holds things farther out, works at midday instead of dusk, angles an object into better light, sits nearer the fire, turns their head to cut glare, or hands the fine work to someone whose eyes are sharper that year. A group might quietly reassign who does the flint napping once an older man's hands start missing the fine strikes, or shift the hide scraping to someone whose eyes still catch the thin spots. None of that sounds dramatic, but survival was never won in one heroic move. It was won in 1,000 small, repeated adjustments that, stacked over years, turn a real weakness into something manageable. And vision never had to carry the whole load anyway. Humans stack senses and pile culture on top of them. A smell on the wind, fresh tracks in mud, a bird's alarm call, dung still warm, a branch snapped the wrong way. The standing memory that this ravine holds water longer than the next valley over. Sight mattered enormously. It just never worked alone, which means losing some of it never meant losing everything. Eyesight didn't only fail with age either. It failed through injury, constant smoke irritation, dust, infection, a stone flake or thorn catching the eye, a blow to the face, a bout of disease that scarred the cornea. Some people went partly blind, some lost an eye outright. Healed fractures around the eye socket, found in ancient remains, tell us some of these injuries happened long before death, which means the person lived on afterward, often for years, in a body that needed the group's tolerance if nothing else. Here's where humans start looking genuinely unusual among animals. Archaeology has turned up several cases of people surviving injuries and disabilities severe enough that independent survival looks impossible without sustained help from others. One well-known skeleton shows a person who lived for years after a disabling injury, cared for well past the point where they could still pull their own weight physically. That doesn't prove exactly how much care every disabled person received, or guarantee a happy ending in every case. Ancient life could be brutally unforgiving, and people absolutely were abandoned when resources ran short. But it does prove there was never one fixed outcome. Outcome depended on the person's age, what kind of vision they'd lost, whether food was scarce or plentiful, whether the group was large enough to absorb the loss, and whether the person could still trade labor or knowledge for their keep. Did anyone ever rig up something like primitive glasses? Almost certainly not in any wearable, functional sense. Water can magnify, certain crystals distort and enlarge. Later societies eventually built real magnifying lenses. But Pleistocene foragers weren't correcting vision with optics. Their fixes were behavioral and social, not mechanical. Which points to the real twist in this whole story. Failing eyesight was probably less disabling in parts of ancient life than it is in ours. Modern life demands a kind of visual precision that's deeply unnatural, reading tiny fonts, staring into glowing rectangles, distinguishing symbols at a glance, driving at speed, locking focus on a near object for hours straight. Mild visual flaws become constant friction because the modern environment exposes them all day, every day. A forager's world asked for something different, reading landscape, catching motion, recognizing faces, close hand skill, night caution, remembering the path. Someone weak in one kind of seeing could still be excellent at 9 other things that had nothing to do with sight at all. So when the question is how ancient humans coped with poor eyesight, the honest answer isn't that they simply didn't. Sometimes they died. That's real, and it doesn't need softening. But very often they adapted, moved closer, worked in better light, shifted tasks, leaned harder on hearing and smell and memory, followed a sharper-eyed companion through the dark. They lost one skill and kept 10 others, and the group decided, over and over, case by case, that they were still worth the effort. That might be the most human part of the whole story. We like to imagine survival as a test of perfect bodies. More often, it was a test of whether a group could keep its imperfect bodies useful. No sharper claws, no better night vision, no lens of any kind, just a social world strong enough to carry weakness. So go back to the man by the fire. Maybe he no longer leads the chase. Maybe younger eyes catch the movement first, every time now. But when tracks turn up by the river and no one can tell if they belong to a stranger or to one of their own coming back late, he reads it from the spacing before anyone else even bends down to look. When the herd turns after the first frost, he already knows which way because he's watched it turn the same way for 30 years. And when he can't make out the shape moving beyond the firelight, he doesn't need to. He just listens while someone else names it for him.